Porky's Pooch, the good puppy.
Godzilla versus his enemies of destruction, the king of all monsters against the baddest.
Pet rock.
Do you ever remember those funny toys from the 1980s? The ones we loved so much it's wild we forgot them? These toys were everywhere in childhood bedrooms, playgrounds, and schoolyards, shaping afternoons of laughter and play. How did something that once felt unforgettable just fade away? Mad balls were the kind of toy that made parents shake their heads but made kids laugh until they could not breathe. These rubber balls were painted with the most grotesque, exaggerated monster faces you could imagine. Bulging eyes, oozing slime, giant fangs, and bright, garish colors. They were meant to be gross, and that was exactly what made them irresistible. Kids would collect them, trade them, and then immediately throw them at each other as if the whole point of owning one was to watch it bounce off a friend's forehead. They had names to match the madness too. Screamin' Mimi, Slobulous, Skullface, all designed to sound as outrageous as they looked. The texture of the rubber made them springy but not too hard, so you could bounce them off walls, lockers, or the family television without doing too much damage. That is not to say there were no accidents. Plenty of living room lamps met their end thanks to a rogue mad ball. But that chaos was part of the fun. They fit perfectly into the 1980s world of gross-out humor, where slime, monsters, and weirdness sold better than anything else. Today, if you found one in a toy box, you might wonder why on earth kids ever wanted something so ugly. But back then, mad balls were the badge of a kid who loved weirdness, messiness, and just a little bit of trouble. Boglins were another bizarre creation that somehow turned creepy into cool. These were rubber hand puppets that looked like swamp goblins with wrinkled faces, glowing eyes, and slimy skin textures. You slipped your hand inside and suddenly had control of a blinking, snarling little monster that could move its eyes and mouth. They came packaged in little plastic cages, complete with bars, as if you were adopting a dangerous creature from a swamp. The marketing leaned into this. It was all about unleashing something wild and mischievous. Kids loved using them to freak out their siblings or scare the family cat. The rubber was thick and flexible, giving the puppets a surprisingly realistic range of motion, which made them feel alive in your hands. The commercials promised they were not just toys. They were creatures waiting to be let loose. It was equal parts fun and unsettling, the kind of toy you brought to school just to get a reaction. While parents thought they were strange and maybe even a little ugly, kids saw Boglins as proof that toys did not have to be cute to be entertaining. They were slimy, weird, and unforgettable. A perfect slice of 1980s toy insanity. My pet monster was one of those toys that confused adults but thrilled kids. At first glance, it was just a stuffed animal, a big, blue, fuzzy creature with horns and a goofy grin. But then you noticed the giant plastic handcuffs snapped around its wrists. The idea was that this monster had been captured, and now it was your job to befriend it and keep it under control. The handcuffs were bright orange and chunky, with a snap mechanism that could really lock, so kids used them not just on the toy but also on themselves, their siblings, or even the family dog. It was cute, but also a little disturbing. Why did this monster have to be restrained? That question did not matter to kids. What mattered was that it looked tough while still being huggable, and it felt like owning a creature from your own Saturday morning cartoon lineup. My pet monster even had its own television show, further cementing its place in 1980s pop culture. For kids, it was the perfect balance of scary and silly, a reminder that monsters could be friends as long as they were chained up with bright orange cuffs. Garbage pail. Kids' figures took the gross-out trend to the next level. The trading cards were already infamous, parodies of Cabbage Patch Kids with disgusting names and even grosser illustrations. Turning them into actual little plastic figures was both inevitable and shocking. These toys were small, about the size of action figures, but packed with details like oozing slime, dripping noses, bulging stomachs, and exaggerated features that made parents cringe. Kids, on the other hand, could not get enough. The thrill was in how wrong they felt, collecting dolls that were the complete opposite of the sweet, innocent Cabbage Patch Kids everyone else had. Names like Atom Bomb and Leaky Lindsay made kids giggle and made teachers roll their eyes when they turned up in classrooms. Parents might have hated them, but that only made them cooler. They were rebellion wrapped in plastic, proof that the 1980s toy world was not afraid to get messy, weird, and a little shocking. For kids, Garbage Pail Kids figures were treasures to be swapped, displayed, and laughed at endlessly. Pogo Ball was one of those toys that looked simple but turned into pure chaos once you tried it. It was basically a rubber ball trapped inside a plastic platform, like a cross between a pogo stick and a spaceship. You stood on the platform, squeezed the ball between your feet, and tried to bounce. The commercials showed kids sailing through the air like it was effortless fun, but in reality, most people ended up wobbling, falling, or scraping their knees on the driveway. The ball gave it just enough instability to make every bounce feel like a gamble. That did not stop kids from trying over and over again. Friends would time each other to see who could last the longest, or who could bounce the highest before toppling over. It was a mix of toy and dare, something you played with knowing full well you might get hurt. For many kids, mastering the Pogo Ball felt like conquering a personal Everest, even if most attempts ended in laughter and a few bruises. Koosh balls were proof that sometimes the simplest toys are the most addictive. These were just rubber balls made up of hundreds of stretchy strands that exploded out from the center like colorful fireworks. They were soft, squishy, and perfect for tossing around without breaking anything, but they also had a knack for getting stuck in the strangest places: ceiling fans, tree branches, lockers, even tangled in a classmate's hair. That was half the fun. The strands made a distinctive whoosh sound when thrown, and catching one felt oddly satisfying as the rubber strands collapsed into your palm. Teachers hated them because kids could not resist bringing them into classrooms, flicking them around when they should have been paying attention. They came in neon colors that screamed 1980s, making them just as much a fashion accessory as a toy. Koosh balls were simple, silly, and endlessly entertaining. A reminder that sometimes all you need is a handful of stretchy rubber to make a memory. Popples were the plush toys that pulled off a magic trick. At first, they looked like colorful teddy bears with round ears, big eyes, and cheerful grins. But then you flipped them inside out, and they folded neatly into little fuzzy balls. The pop, back into their original form, was the real thrill. Kids loved watching their cuddly toy transform and then showing off the trick to friends. Each Popple had its own bright color scheme and personality, making them collectible as well as fun. They were soft enough to sleep with, but playful enough to serve as entertainment during playdates. Commercials showed Popples bouncing around like living creatures, and for kids, that seemed perfectly believable. They combined the appeal of a stuffed animal with the surprise of a gimmick, making them one of the more memorable plush toys of the decade. Popples may look odd now, but in their time, they were pure toy magic. Cabbage Patch Snacktime Kids were the dolls that proved even cute toys could be unintentionally terrifying. These dolls were designed to eat plastic food with a battery-powered mouth that pulled the pieces in and swallowed them into a little backpack. On paper, it sounded fun. Your doll could actually have a meal with you. In practice, it got a little scary. The motorized mouth did not stop at plastic food. It grabbed hair, fingers, and clothing too, and once it started chewing, it would not let go. Parents quickly realized this was less adorable snack time and more miniature horror show. Still, the dolls sold well because they combined the Cabbage Patch Kids' trademark cuteness with an interactive gimmick. Kids loved the idea of playing mom or dad while feeding their doll, even if it occasionally ended in tears when the doll decided to eat something it should not. Looking back, it is amazing these ever made it to shelves, but in the 1980s, toy companies were willing to try almost anything. Pound puppies were the ultimate adoptable stuffed animal of the 1980s. These plush dogs had droopy ears, sad eyes, and a soft, huggable body that made you want to rescue them immediately. They came in little cardboard doghouse packages, complete with adoption certificates, so kids felt like they were really giving a home to a lonely pup. Opening the box felt like meeting a real pet for the first time, with kids carefully signing their names on the certificate as if they had just gone through an adoption process. Many children gave their pound puppies elaborate backstories, treating them like real family members who needed love and attention. Parents often found entire kennels of them lined up on beds, each one tucked in under a blanket. Each one had a unique look, different colors, spots, or floppy ears, so kids collected them like a real shelter of stuffed animals. The marketing leaned heavily on guilt. How could you leave such a sad puppy behind? Kids begged their parents for one, promising they would take care of it, even though the only care required was cuddling. They became a massive hit, spawning cartoons, accessories, and endless lines of new puppies. Pound puppies tapped into a kid's natural instinct to nurture, while also being ridiculously cute and soft. They were more than toys. They were companions, straight out of the pound and into your bed. Wuzzles were one of the strangest and funniest ideas to come out of the 1980s plush craze. Each one was a hybrid animal mashup, like a lion mixed with a bumblebee, or a hippo combined with a rabbit. They were brightly colored, fuzzy, and completely ridiculous, but that was the charm. Kids spent hours giggling over the combinations, trying to imagine what real-life versions would look like if they somehow existed. Some even tried to invent their own Wuzzles by mixing up animals on paper, proving the toys sparked creativity as much as play. The cartoon series gave them distinct personalities, which only made kids want to collect every single one. Every Wuzzle had a pun-filled name to match its mixed-up design, and kids collected them to see just how wild the combinations could get. They came with a cartoon series that made them even more popular, showing the strange creatures living in their equally strange world. Parents might have rolled their eyes at yet another plush animal line, but kids adored the silliness. A Wuzzle felt like owning something unique, a stuffed animal that stood out from the rest of the pack. Looking back, they were absurd, but absurd in the best possible way. Glowworm was one of those toys that seemed so simple but left a huge impression. Shaped like a plush caterpillar in pajamas, it lit up with a soft glow when you squeezed its body. At bedtime, that glowing face was both comforting and, let's be honest, a little eerie. Some kids swore Glowworm helped them fall asleep faster, while others admitted it kept them awake because they could not stop staring at its glowing face. Parents, meanwhile, loved the fact that it worked as a toy and a nightlight at the same time. Even when the batteries started to fade, kids still squeezed it, hoping for just one more faint flicker of light. Some kids loved snuggling up to their Glowworm as a nightlight substitute, while others thought it looked like an alien staring back at them. Either way, it became a must-have bedtime buddy in the 1980s. The commercials showed smiling kids drifting off peacefully, clutching their glowing pail as if it guaranteed sweet dreams. In reality, that soft vinyl head sometimes got a little creepy in the dark, with its faint green light flickering as the batteries wore down. Still, Glowworm was memorable because it mixed the comfort of a stuffed animal with the practicality of a nightlight. It was cute, strange, and oddly magical all at once. Just the kind of weird charm that made 1980s toys unforgettable. Muscle Men, officially called MUSCLE, were tiny pink wrestling figurines that managed to be both bizarre and irresistible. Standing barely 2 inches tall, they came in packs filled with dozens of strange-looking characters. Some had bulging muscles and masks, while others looked like aliens, robots, or monsters that had wandered into a wrestling ring. Kids often invented entire tournaments, pitting their weirdest figures against each other in pretend championship battles. They argued fiercely about which figures were the rarest, often trading them on the playground like prized treasures. Parents might not have understood their appeal, but for kids, these strange little wrestlers represented an entire universe of imagination. Kids would line them up, slam them together, and declare epic battles even though the figures were stiff as statues. There were hundreds of them to collect, and half the fun was not knowing which oddball design you would pull from a pack. Parents looked at them and saw cheap lumps of rubber, but kids saw a sprawling league of fighters with endless potential. The name promised muscle, But in reality, these toys were more about absurdity than toughness. They were weird, fun, and collectible. Exactly the formula for playground popularity in the 1980s. Glow Friends were like the softer, sweeter cousins of Glowworm. Instead of one glowing plush, you had a whole collection of little bug-shaped toys that lit up in the dark. Fireflies, ladybugs, and caterpillars became nightlight buddies, glowing faintly after being charged up under a lamp or flashlight. Kids often tucked them into their pillows, convinced the glowing little bugs would guard them through the night. Parents liked that they were small, inexpensive, and easy to collect, which made them perfect stocking stuffers. Entire bedroom shelves were sometimes lined with glowing insects, turning kids' rooms into twinkling mini-galaxies at bedtime. They were small enough to tuck under your pillow or line up on your nightstand, making bedtime feel a little less lonely. The glow did not last very long, but kids did not care. Just the idea that their toy could light up felt magical. They came in bright pastel colors, with big smiling faces that looked friendlier than any real bug ever could. Parents loved them because they were marketed as soothing bedtime pals, and kids loved them because they seemed alive when the lights went out. Glow Friends were part toy, part comfort object, and all nostalgia for anyone who grew up in the 1980s. Teddy Ruxpin was a marvel of 1980s technology, or a nightmare depending on how you felt about toys that talked. This animatronic bear had a built-in cassette player, and when you popped in one of his story tapes, his mouth and eyes moved along with the narration. For kids, it was like watching a stuffed animal come to life, reading you bedtime stories with a friendly, robotic charm. Some kids whispered to him at night, convinced he could actually hear and respond back, while others swore he moved even without a tape inside. Parents, on the other hand, often jumped when they heard Teddy's voice suddenly start up from across the room. The toy had an odd way of blurring the line between comfort and creepiness, which only made him more unforgettable. For adults, the moving plastic mouth was often described as mildly terrifying, especially when the tape jammed and Teddy kept moving his lips without sound. Still, he became a cultural phenomenon. Kids adored him, dragging him everywhere as both toy and storyteller. He even had his own television show, proving just how popular he was. Sure, the mechanism inside was loud, and the magic disappeared a little when you realized it was just a cassette player in a bear suit. But in the moment, Teddy Ruxpin felt like the future of toys, and for many kids, he really was a best friend. Speak and Spell looked more like a piece of science fiction equipment than a kid's toy. Shaped like a bright orange tablet with a keyboard, it was designed to teach kids how to spell words. You typed in letters, and it would speak the word back in a robotic voice that was both amazing and a little unsettling. Some kids treated it like a game, trying to trick the machine with nonsense words, only to laugh when the monotone voice refused to cooperate. Others would sit for hours, punching in letters just to hear that strange voice repeat familiar words over and over. Parents were thrilled because, unlike most noisy toys of the era, this one felt like it was actually helping kids learn. The sound chip gave it a flat, monotone delivery that made every word sound like it came from a spaceship computer. Still, for kids, it was pure magic. Suddenly, the toy was talking and helping you learn at the same time. Parents loved it because it was educational, which meant it counted as a toy and homework rolled into one. Kids loved it because pressing buttons and hearing the weird robotic responses never got old. Speak and Spell was one of those rare toys that felt futuristic and useful, making it a staple of the 1980s toy chest. Lightbrite was one of the most creative toys of the 1980s. You got a light-up board, little plastic pegs in every color of the rainbow, and black paper templates with outlines to follow. Stick the pegs through the paper into the glowing board, and suddenly you had a glowing picture of a clown, a house, or whatever you wanted to design. Kids would sit in the dark, mesmerized by their glowing creations, proudly showing them off to parents as if they had just invented neon art. The pegs themselves became tiny treasures, sorted into jars or scattered under couches where they would later be found by bare feet. Even the smell of the warm light bulb became part of the memory, a faint scent that clung to every Lightbrite session. The satisfying click of the peg sliding into place was half the fun, and seeing the picture light up was pure magic. The downside? Losing pegs constantly, stepping on them barefoot, or running out of black paper sheets and having to wing it. And of course, the light bulb inside always seemed to burn out at the worst possible time. But when it worked, Lightbrite turned any dark room into an art studio, and for kids in the 1980s, it felt like creating neon masterpieces. Weebles were one of those toys that came with a catchphrase you could not forget. Weebles wobble, but they do not fall down. These egg-shaped figures had weighted bottoms that made them pop back upright no matter how hard you pushed them over. They came in all sorts of costumes: clowns, astronauts, farmers, and usually had little playsets like houses or cars. The joy came from pushing them down as hard as possible, only to watch them bounce back upright with stubborn determination. Parents loved them because they were nearly indestructible, and kids loved them because they seemed alive in their own silly way. Even when a Weeble got a little scratched or dented, it only added to its charm. Proof that it had survived countless rounds of wobbling chaos. Kids loved knocking them around, watching them roll and spin before bouncing upright again. The promise was that they did not fall down, but every kid knew stepping on one or smashing it too hard against the floor could prove otherwise. They were simple, indestructible fun, until someone left them scattered around the room like landmines. Still, Weebles were the kind of toy you could play with endlessly without ever needing instructions, batteries, or a plan. They were silly, durable, and absolutely unforgettable. Stretch Armstrong was a superhero toy unlike any other. Instead of hard plastic, his body was made of thick rubber filled with a mysterious goo that let you stretch him to impossible lengths. You could pull his arms across the room, twist his legs into knots, or stretch him between two kids like a tug-of-war rope. Every kid tested his limits, wondering just how far he could go before something gave way. When he finally leaked, it felt like discovering forbidden knowledge, the secret of what really lived inside Stretch Armstrong's skin. For many, that first tear was both horrifying and thrilling, a rite of passage that proved you had pushed the toy beyond its design. Slowly, he would snap back into shape, at least most of the time. The goo inside was rumored to be some kind of corn syrup-like substance, which made the toy sticky and a little unsettling if it ever leaked. Parents hated when he tore, but kids saw that goo as proof of his weird, stretchy magic. Stretch Armstrong was a perfect mix of superhero fantasy and scientific oddity, making him one of the strangest and most beloved toys of the 1980s. Slinky Dog was the awkward cousin of the classic Slinky. Instead of just a metal spring, this toy had a plastic dog's head and tail connected by a slinky for a torso. You could tug it along on little wheels, and the body would stretch and bounce in a comically wobbly way. Kids often treated Slinky Dog like a real pet, dragging it around the house as if it were alive. The spring body made it unpredictable. It might stretch smoothly one minute, then suddenly tangle itself into a hopeless knot the next. Parents spent more time untangling Slinky Dogs than kids did playing with them, but the goofy charm always won out. Kids loved pulling it around, even though the slinky body had a bad habit of getting tangled. The spring could twist, bend, or even snap if stretched too far, leading to a very sad, droopy dog. Still, its goofy charm made it a staple of toy collections. Long before it became famous in the Toy Story movies, Slinky Dog was a weird, wonderful invention that turned a simple spring into a character. Rockem sockem robots were as noisy as they were fun. Two plastic boxers, one red and one blue, stood in a miniature ring controlled by buttons you smashed with both hands. Each punch made their heads jerk and rattle until, bam, a well-placed hit sent one fighter's head popping up in defeat. The battles rarely lasted long, but kids always demanded a rematch, slamming buttons harder with each round. The sound of clicking plastic became a soundtrack for sibling rivalry, echoing through living rooms across the country. Even adults sometimes joined in, turning what started as a kid's toy into an impromptu family tournament. The fights were fast, loud, and usually ended with kids slamming buttons so hard the whole ring shook. The plastic-on-plastic clatter could fill a living room in seconds, making it less of a quiet game and more of a sporting event. But that was the point. Rockem's sockem robots turned playtime into a brawl, complete with cheers, groans, and rematches. It was pure 1980s toy joy, simple, mechanical, and endlessly competitive. Big wheel trikes were the kings of the sidewalk in the 1980s. Unlike the shiny chrome bikes with their training wheels, the big wheel was loud, low, and made entirely of hard plastic. The oversized front wheel and tiny back wheels gave kids the feeling of being race car drivers, even though they were barely a foot off the ground. The signature move, that screeching spin out, pedal hard, yank the handlebars, and skid sideways in a way that made you feel like Evel Knievel. Of course, all that skidding meant the thin plastic wheels wore flat in no time, creating that thunk, thunk, thunk sound as you rode down the street. Parents swore they could hear a big wheel coming from 3 blocks away. They were built to be indestructible, but that did not stop kids from testing the limits, racing down steep driveways, crashing into curbs, or attempting tricks that always ended with scraped knees. The seats were adjustable, so the trike grew with you, but every kid eventually outgrew theirs physically before ever being ready to give it up emotionally. Owning a big wheel was a rite of passage, a declaration that you were ready for speed, freedom, and neighborhood bragging rights. Even today, adults look back at their big wheel days with equal parts pride and amazement that they survived those reckless rides. The Viewmaster with 3D reels was like holding a private movie theater in your hands. That chunky red plastic viewer with its little white lever on the side felt almost futuristic. You would slot in a cardboard reel filled with tiny slides, hold it up to the light, and suddenly the flat images popped into 3 dimensions. Nature scenes, cartoons, movie tie-ins, even travel destinations. It felt like a ticket to another world. Kids could sit for hours flipping through reels, hearing the satisfying click of the lever as the next image snapped into place. Parents loved it because it was quiet entertainment, no batteries or mess required. But the magic was real. Those 3D slides were surprisingly vivid, giving you a sense of depth that felt almost alive. Collecting reels became half the fun, with special edition sets tied to Disney movies or Saturday morning cartoons. The viewer itself was nearly indestructible, and it seemed every kid had one tucked in their toy box or stuffed under their bed. It may have been simple, but the Viewmaster made you feel like you were seeing something secret, something special that nobody else could see in that exact moment. For kids in the 1980s, it was as close to virtual reality as you could get. Fashion plates gave kids the power to become instant designers, even if their creations made no sense. The set came with plastic plates etched with outlines of different tops, bottoms, and accessories. You slotted them into a frame, laid paper over the top, and rubbed with a crayon to transfer the design. Then, with a quick switch of plates, you could mix and match into hundreds of outfit combinations. Some were glamorous, others were flat-out ridiculous, like pairing a ball gown skirt with cowboy boots and a scuba mask. But that was the fun. You were in charge, and the sillier the design, the better. The rubbing process itself was oddly satisfying, watching faint outlines appear like a secret sketch coming to life. Once the outline was complete, kids could color in their fashion masterpieces, adding wild neon shades or patterns that no real fabric store would ever stock. Parents thought it encouraged creativity. Kids thought it was an excuse to laugh at their friends' terrible design skills. The plastic plates were durable, but after endless use, the crayons wore down to stubs, leaving every fashion plate's set covered in rainbow smudges. It was messy, it was goofy, and it was exactly what toy fashion should be, totally unserious and endlessly fun. Colorforms playsets were the definition of simple fun with endless possibilities. Each set came with a glossy cardboard background, a living room, a castle, a city street, and sheets of thin vinyl stickers that clung without adhesive. You could peel them off, stick them on, move them around, and rearrange the scene as many times as you wanted. The magic was in how well those stickers stuck, always just enough to stay in place but never leaving a mess behind. Kids loved building elaborate stories, placing characters in wacky poses or swapping items between sets for added chaos. One day, your Colorform figures might be peacefully having a picnic. The next day, they were all piled into a spaceship headed for Mars. Parents loved them because they were reusable, no dried-up markers or piles of crumpled paper. But the downside was inevitable. Over time, the vinyl lost its cling, curling at the edges until your characters slid sadly off the board. Still, the creativity they sparked was unmatched. Colorforms were like an introduction to stage directing, except your cast of characters was made of sticky vinyl. For many kids in the 1980s, they were the perfect mix of art, play, and imagination. Before Tamagotchis took over the late 1990s, there were clunky little devices called Giga pets. These primitive digital pets fit on a keychain, and the screen displayed a crude, pixelated creature that demanded constant attention. You had to feed it, play with it, and clean up after it, usually by pressing the same 2 or 3 buttons endlessly. The graphics were simple, just a few blinking dots to represent food or happiness, but kids took their responsibility seriously. The problem? These things beeped constantly, no matter where you were. In the middle of class, in the car, even in the middle of the night, your Giga pet was always chirping for something. Forget to press the buttons long enough, and your pet would literally die, leaving behind a tiny, pixelated gravestone. Parents grew tired of the beeping, teachers outright banned them, but kids still clung to the thrill of carrying a living digital companion in their pocket. Giga pets were frustrating, demanding, and totally impractical. But for kids in the 1980s and early 1990s, they were unforgettable proof that the future had arrived in beeping, blinking form. Barbie in the 1970s was more than plastic. She was a portal, a way to imagine what life could look like if the world were just a little more pink, a little more perfect. Kids did not just play with Barbie, they lived with her. She had outfits for every occasion. Dream houses with elevators, cars with glittering wheels. She could be a doctor, an astronaut, a fashion model, a veterinarian, all before you had even picked a major. Her world was one where nothing felt too big to dream. And for a generation of girls, and more than a few boys, Barbie was proof that you could be glamorous and powerful at the same time. You could give her stories, drama, triumph, romance, heartbreak. You could change her hair, swap her clothes, reinvent her life in one afternoon. Barbie taught kids to narrate, to imagine, to believe that reinvention was normal. And even when her legs got loose or her hair went frizzy, you still loved her, because she had been there. She had danced across your carpet, ridden in your bike basket, and laid beside you on nights you were too afraid to sleep alone. Barbie was never just a doll. She was you, just with a better wardrobe. There was no intention to buy anything, and everyone knew it. The furniture store with the free popcorn machine was Dad's idea of a Saturday outing. You would walk in and get hit with that smell, leather, fresh carpet, and hot butter. Dad would head straight for the recliners, and you? Straight to the red and silver popcorn machine near the back. It was always humming, full of those little white bags that were supposed to be single serve, but somehow you found a way to go back 5 times without getting caught. Meanwhile, Dad was doing his test sit. That meant stretching, sighing, and rocking the recliner back and forth like he was making a real decision. "Too stiff," he would say. "This one's a back killer." The sales guy always came over and Dad would nod along, arms crossed, like he was closing in on the deal of the century. But you knew he was not buying a couch, he just liked the idea of picking one. And that popcorn? It was better than movie theater popcorn because it was earned. All this to say, shopping never felt like shopping with Dad. It felt like a game. But speaking of buttons, lights, and games, let me tell you about the kind of place where Dad's inner nerd really came to life. Beefsteak Charlie's did not want you to just eat. They wanted you to feast. This was the kind of place that dared you to come hungry, then dared you again to leave room for dessert. Their tagline was, "You're gonna get spoiled," and honestly, they meant it. With a full salad bar, all-you-can-eat shrimp, and unlimited sangria, beer, and wine, it was less a dinner and more a challenge. The vibes? Equal parts wood-paneled steakhouse and slightly buzzed family reunion. People went for birthdays, promotions, divorces, any excuse to eat until your waistband begged for mercy. And the food, surprisingly solid. The steak was not exactly filet mignon, but it hit the spot. The shrimp came fast and endless. And the bread? Warm, crusty, and forgettable. But who was there for bread? Beefsteak Charlies rode the wave of 80s extravagance until the bottom line caught up with them. Too much generosity and not enough foot traffic sealed its fate. But in its heyday, it was a buffet fever dream come to life. So if you thought that was decadent, just wait. The next restaurant stripped the glitz and turned hot dogs and tacos into a Southern California classic, with a name that only made sense once you saw the menu. The kitchen of the 1970s did not just serve food, it made a statement. And that statement was harvest gold and avocado green. These two colors dominated every American kitchen appliance. Your refrigerator, your stove, even your blender wore these colors like a uniform. It was not just paint, it was identity. These colors were supposed to represent nature, health, and a touch of luxury. Harvest gold had a warm golden glow that felt like sunlight. Avocado green was earthy and bold, a perfect match for the indoor plant movement and natural fiber craze of the time. But somewhere along the way, the trend turned into a punchline. Yet, for those who lived it, there is no forgetting. You remember the heavy click of the fridge door, the way the green surface reflected your face in the oven window, the hum of the blender making root beer floats. These were not sleek or modern. They were sturdy, reliable, and filled with the smells of Sunday dinners and burnt toast. Maybe you were not fond of these colors as a kid. Maybe you even hated them. But when you see them now, something deep inside stirs. They are more than colors. They are the palette of your childhood. The Easy Bake Oven brought the thrill of baking into the tiny hands of children everywhere. Released by Kenner in 1963, it looked like a pastel-colored toy, but worked like real kitchen equipment, albeit powered by a common light bulb. Slide the cake tray in, wait just long enough for anticipation to bubble, and out came a warm, soft treat you made yourself. The cakes were tiny, the brownies a bit dense, but the pride was enormous. For many young kids, especially girls at the time, the Easy Bake Oven was a first taste of independence. No parental supervision needed, no open flames, just you and a cake mix in a miniature pan. It sparked creativity, confidence, and plenty of sibling rivalries over who got the bigger slice. The toy's appeal lasted for decades, but those original models with their sleek retro look and that gentle hum from the light bulb warming up have a special place in memory. Long before kids had screens and apps, this was hands-on, slightly messy, and totally satisfying play. The smell of a baking chocolate chip cake from a 40-watt bulb is not something you easily forget. Bellbottom jeans were not just fashion. They were rebellion stitched in denim. Wide-legged and loud, they turned every hallway into a runway and every walk into a statement. By the mid-1970s, if your jeans did not flare at the bottom, you were not keeping up. These pants were a symbol, a sign that you were part of something, part of the cool kids, the disco kids, the rock and roll dreamers. Bell-bottoms flowed. They danced when you moved. They made you feel older, bolder, somehow freer. And even though your parents might have rolled their eyes, they could not deny their popularity. You got them in every color, sometimes with patches, sometimes with glitter thread. You wore them with platform shoes, fringe jackets, or whatever your local mall had on sale. They were ridiculous and perfect. Bell-bottoms said you were not just a kid anymore. You were growing up. You were trying things. You were choosing what you looked like for the first time. And maybe that is why they stuck. They were more than fabric. They were freedom at the ankles. A little reminder that style, like youth, should never be quiet. You know the place. Wood paneling on every wall, carpet so sticky it felt like your shoes might stay behind without you. The local bowling alley was not fancy. It was not even clean. But it was ours. That neon open sign buzzing in the window like it had not taken a break since 1963, that was the beacon. Dad would hand you a pair of shoes that smelled like defeat and victory all at once, then lace up his own with the confidence of a man who once bowled a turkey in '68. Scoreboards flashed with those pixelated animations, and the jukebox in the corner had a permanent skip in track 6. The cheese fries came in paper boats, scalding hot and gooey enough to glue your soul together. You would keep score with a tiny pencil, and Dad would act like the math was rocket science. For some reason, that made it better. There was always one ball he swore by, the dusty maroon one with a chipped thumb hole that he said gave him more spin. It never did, but he let you try it anyway. And after every frame, win, or gutter, he high-fived like it was the championship. But if you really want to see Dad in his element, wait until you hear about the dented can grocery run. Acid wash jeans were loud before you even opened your mouth. With their blotchy patterns and faded splotches, they looked like someone had taken a bleach bottle to denim, and somehow, that became cool. These jeans were rebellious, messy, and unmistakably 1980s. Everyone had a pair. Some wore them tight-rolled at the ankle, others let them drape over high-top sneakers. Acid wash showed up in jackets, skirts, and full matching sets that turned entire outfits into walking eye strain. You could not blend in wearing acid wash. You stood out, and that was the point. It was denim with attitude. Rough, bold, a little chaotic. Parents hated it. Teachers rolled their eyes. But teens embraced the weirdness. It felt edgy, like you were wearing the uniform of a generation that refused to dress quietly. Old photographs now show groups of kids lined up in front of lockers, each one looking like they had just emerged from a bleach accident and loving it. Acid wash was not timeless, it was not flattering, but it was unforgettable. And in a decade known for excess, it fit right in. Even now, pulling on an old pair brings back the noise, the neon, and the thrill of breaking the fashion rules. Tang was not just a drink, it was a symbol of the future. Pitched as the beverage astronauts drank in space, this orange powdered miracle made you feel like you were participating in the space race from your own kitchen. Every kid wanted Tang. Every mom kept a jar in the cupboard. All you needed was water and a spoon, and suddenly you were sipping the same stuff that orbited the Earth. It was sweet, artificial, and packed with flavor. And it made you feel cool. The powder never fully dissolved, which meant gritty sips near the end were just part of the experience. If you got the scoop size right, you earned that perfect bright orange glow. Too much, and it was syrupy sludge. Too little, and it was just sad orange water. Tang was more than a drink, it was a cultural event. The jar was wide and squat with a screw-on lid, and every household seemed to have one. Kids felt proud making it on their own. No adult needed. It became the go-to for lunch, after school, and Saturday cartoons. You never questioned the science behind it. You just knew that if it was good enough for NASA, it was good enough for you. That dusty scoop brought the cosmos into your kitchen. Chatty Cathy was more than just a doll. She was the voice of a generation. Introduced by Mattel in 1960, she was one of the first mass-produced talking dolls, and for many little girls, she felt like a real friend. With her round face, blonde bob haircut, and soft vinyl limbs, she looked sweet enough. But the real magic happened when you pulled the cord on her back. Suddenly, Cathy could speak, saying phrases like, "Let's play school," or "I love you." She became a sensation almost overnight. Children were enchanted by her ability to talk back, even if her voice was tinny and slightly robotic. For parents, she was a marvel of engineering. For kids, she was a companion who never interrupted and always agreed. Cathy sparked a whole line of talking dolls and helped kick off a new wave of interactive toys. And although later toys would be flashier, louder, and more advanced, none carried the same simple wonder. For many, the sound of that pull string and the soft mechanical voice is a vivid echo of childhood. Chatty Cathy is often remembered not just for what she said, but for what it felt like to hear her talk for the first time. The Brady Bunch was a family like no other, and yet it felt like everyone's family. 6 kids, 2 parents, and a house full of laughter, chaos, and pastel-colored drama. Premiering in 1969, but becoming a cultural mainstay throughout the 1970s, it was pure television comfort food. Every episode ended with a smile, a hug, and a catchy lesson on sharing, honesty, or sibling rivalry. It was not edgy. It was not deep. But it was warm. And for kids whose homes were not always so perfect, the Brady Bunch offered a glimpse of what harmony could look like, even if it was idealized. Mike and Carol never yelled. Alice the housekeeper always had a one-liner ready. And the kids? They were just messy enough to be real. You picked a favorite. You sang along with the theme song. You quoted Jan's iconic "Marcia, Marcia, Marcia." It was pop culture innocence. A time capsule of bell-bottoms, perms, and avocado-colored kitchens. And even if you rolled your eyes at the cheese, deep down you loved that family, because they showed that even the most blended bunch could belong. And that felt revolutionary in its own gentle way. Radio Shack. You did not go to Radio Shack to shop. You went there to touch. The moment you walked through the door, it was like stepping onto a spaceship. Racks of wires, batteries, and gadgets you had never even heard of. And in the middle of it all, the demo table, a flashing, beeping paradise. Dad would say, "We're just browsing," but an hour later, he was still pressing buttons, turning knobs, and pretending he was building a satellite in the garage. You would find the mini keyboard and try to play "Mary Had a Little Lamb" while he talked tech with the teenage clerk behind the counter. Every once in a while, he would point at something and say, "I had one of these back in college," even if he definitely did not. He would pick up a transistor radio, weigh it in his hand like a jeweler inspecting a rare gem, and give a long, low whistle. Solid piece of work. He never bought anything over $20, but you always walked out feeling like you had been part of a NASA mission. If imagination had a store, it was that one. And right around the corner from that tech wonderland, a pet store where you begged and somehow always walked out with something in a plastic bag. Before you could run to the freezer aisle for a rainbow box of treats, there was Mom's kitchen. And in that kitchen were Tupperware popsicle molds, pastel-colored, slightly sticky, and always in the bottom drawer. You filled them with orange juice, Kool-Aid, or whatever soda was left over. Then you popped on the plastic stick tops, placed them in the freezer, and waited. The waiting was the hardest part. You checked every 10 minutes, you tapped the sides, you asked Mom if they were ready yet. And finally, when they were frozen solid, you ran to the counter and twisted. Sometimes they slid right out. Sometimes you had to run them under warm water for what felt like forever. But the result was always worth it. Homemade popsicles, cold, sweet, and uneven. One might be syrupy, another mostly ice. You never knew, but it was yours. Made by you. That tiny sense of accomplishment melted faster than the treat itself. Sticky fingers, drips down your arm. A moment of pride on a hot afternoon. Tupperware popsicle molds were not flashy, but they were practical, nostalgic, and endlessly fun. Long before popsicles came in plastic wrappers with cartoon mascots, this was the taste of summer at home. Tang was not just a drink. It was an icon of American space-age optimism. Though developed in 1957, it exploded into fame in the 1960s when NASA used it during Project Mercury and Gemini missions. Suddenly, drinking Tang meant more than just orange-flavored powder. It meant drinking like an astronaut. Kids begged their parents for it. Commercials showed bright pictures on sunny breakfast tables with the promise of vitamins and space-fueled energy. It came in a foil pouch, dissolved into water with a quick stir, and tasted like the future. The orange flavor was tangy, a little artificial, but full of excitement. Parents loved it for the no-mess prep and long shelf life. Children loved it because it made them feel connected to the cosmos. No one cared that it was mostly sugar and flavoring. Tang had a mission patch of approval. It became a staple in American pantries, always ready for a quick mix on a busy morning. By the end of the decade, it had grown into more than a drink. It was a symbol, a bright orange badge of the space race, proudly poured into plastic cups across the country. And for many, one sip still tastes like childhood and liftoff. Only in the 1970s could a rock become a celebrity. The pet rock craze of 1975 was so absurd it made sense. For just under $4, you could buy a smooth gray stone nestled in a cardboard box with breathing holes and a care manual. It had no eyes, no mouth, no tricks, and kids adored it. Why? Maybe because it was funny, maybe because it was simple, or maybe, deep down, it was because even the most ordinary thing could feel special with enough imagination. Children gave their pet rocks names, personalities, backstories. They were carried in pockets, introduced to friends, given beds made from shoeboxes. Some kids genuinely believed their rock understood them. It never talked back. It never judged. It just was. And in a world of flashing toys and plastic noise, the pet rock was oddly peaceful. A quiet rebellion against doing too much, against always needing more. It reminded kids that anything could be a toy if you loved it enough. The pet rock was not a gimmick. It was a mirror. It showed how much kids could create out of nothing. And somehow, that silly little stone became one of the most unforgettable fads in history. He never bought a thing, and we never needed a thing, but the appliance store on Route 17, that was a showroom of dreams. The moment you stepped inside, it was like the future had been laid out under fluorescent lights. Fridges the size of Cadillacs, dishwashers that promised miracles, and those clunky microwaves that looked like they could launch satellites. Dad would do the full lap, hands in pockets, nodding like he understood the specs. "Now this here's got dual defrost," he would say, which meant absolutely nothing to any of us. Meanwhile, you were just there for one thing, the donut samples. Right by the scratch and dent section, on a little fold-out table with a paper plate and toothpicks stabbed into sugar-dusted treasures. If you got lucky, there might even be coffee, lukewarm, but still free. Sometimes a salesman would corner Dad, and he would nod solemnly, asking questions like he was running a restaurant and not just trying to keep the toaster alive for another year. It was never about buying. It was about imagining. About standing in front of a top-of-the-line freezer and picturing your name on the deed to a better life. But when it came to good times and cheap thrills, nothing froze time quite like the local bowling alley. Giant scrunchies were not just hair ties, they were statements. Big, bold, and often made of velvet or shiny satin, they wrapped around ponytails like fabric donuts. One was never enough. Some girls stacked them. Others coordinated them with earrings, shirts, or shoelaces. You might even wear one on your wrist, just in case your hair needed managing at a moment's notice. They came in every color of the rainbow and every pattern imaginable. Leopard print? Check. Neon green? Of course. Polka dots the size of your thumb? Why not? Scrunchies were soft, gentle on your hair, and perfect for the sky-high ponytails the 1980s demanded. Some had sequins, some had bows. All of them made your hair look like it was ready to host a party. You could spot a scrunchie from across the school cafeteria. It bounced when you walked and made even the messiest bun look intentional. Looking back, they seem oversized and silly, but that was the point. Scrunchies were playful, practical, and loud in the best possible way. And even though they disappeared for a while, anyone who wore one back then knows, you never really outgrow the joy of tossing your hair into a cloud of fabric. The Sears Wish Book was not just a catalog, it was a dream machine. When that thick holiday edition arrived in the mail, it was like the door to another universe had opened. You grabbed it before anyone else could. You flipped to the toy section immediately, no time for sweaters or tools. The pages were glossy, the pictures were perfect. There were action figures, doll houses, bikes, race car tracks, and board games stacked in impossible abundance. You circled your favorites with a crayon. You wrote your name next to them, like that would make a difference. You made lists. You dropped hints, you dreamed big, and even if you knew you would not get half the things in there, that never stopped the hope. The Wish Book was a fantasy, but it felt real. It made December feel closer. It made you believe. It was not just for kids either. Parents pored over it too, marking pages, planning budgets, whispering over breakfast about what might be possible. The book itself got worn and creased, pages torn, the toy section barely holding on. But it stayed on the coffee table all season long, because sometimes just wishing was enough. And in the 1970s, that one catalog carried a whole generation's hopes between its pages. Milk delivery boxes were part of the morning routine before grocery stores became the center of every neighborhood. In the 1960s, many American homes had a small metal box sitting just outside the front door or tucked near the back steps. Inside, the milkman would leave fresh glass bottles filled with whole milk, sometimes with cream floating at the top. It was a system built on trust and timing. Families left their empty bottles out at night, and by morning, new ones would appear, cold and ready for breakfast. The box was often insulated to keep the milk cool, and in the winter, the tops might freeze and push the cardboard caps up like little crowns. Kids raced to bring it in before it could spoil in the sun. Some deliveries even included extras: eggs, butter, cottage cheese, depending on the service. The clink of bottles in the early morning was a familiar sound, and the sight of the milkman pulling up in a white truck or on a three-wheeled cart was part of the rhythm of daily life. It was personal, reliable, and felt like a small luxury. Today, the boxes are mostly gone, rusting behind old homes or used as planters, but to those who remember, they represent a time when things felt simpler, more local, and a little more dependable, one delivery at a time. Milk delivery boxes were part of the morning routine before grocery stores became the center of every neighborhood. In the 1960s, many American homes had a small metal box sitting just outside the front door or tucked near the back steps. Inside, the milkman would leave fresh glass bottles filled with whole milk, sometimes with cream floating at the top. It was a system built on trust and timing. Families left their empty bottles out at night, and by morning, new ones would appear, cold and ready for breakfast. The box was often insulated to keep the milk cool, and in the winter, the tops might freeze and push the cardboard caps up like little crowns. Kids raced to bring it in before it could spoil in the sun. Some deliveries even included extras: eggs, butter, cottage cheese, depending on the service. The clink of bottles in the early morning was a familiar sound, and the sight of the milkman pulling up in a white truck or on a three-wheeled cart was part of the rhythm of daily life. It was personal, reliable, and felt like a small luxury. Today, the boxes are mostly gone, rusting behind old homes or used as planters, but to those who remember, they represent a time when things felt simpler, more local, and a little more dependable, one delivery at a time. The county auction barn was chaotic, dusty, and loud, and Dad loved every minute of it. From the second you stepped inside, it was a sensory overload. Wooden pens clucked with chickens, bleated with goats, and somewhere a sheep was loudly objecting to something. The auctioneer stood on a platform, voice rising and falling like a song only locals understood. He had his bidding number tucked into his shirt pocket and a mental budget that always magically doubled if the right box came along. There were tables of mystery items, rusty tools, mismatched Tupperware, bundles of wire, and once a broken vending machine that Dad swore he could fix. $10? That's a steal, he would whisper, just before being outbid by the same guy who always bid too high. You did not win much. But when Dad did walk out with something, it was like he had climbed Everest. And even when he lost, he laughed all the way home. The auction was not about getting stuff, it was about the thrill. But when he wanted a guaranteed win, all he needed was a firehouse griddle, a bottle of syrup, and a pancake breakfast made by heroes. VHS rental adventures were more than just picking a movie. They were the night's main event. You walked into the store greeted by rows of clamshell cases, each one shouting for your attention with over-the-top artwork and dramatic taglines. New releases lined the front wall, but they were often already rented, marked by empty plastic holders and your own growing disappointment. So you wandered. Comedy? Horror? Something animated for your little brother? You judged movies by their cover. You flipped tapes to read the backs, squinted at blurry screenshots, and made last-minute switches at checkout. There was pressure. Choose wisely. You had this movie for 2 nights, maybe 3. Forget to rewind? Expect a fee. Some stores even had a "Be Kind Rewind" sign that became a national motto. You got home, made popcorn, and watched together as a family. The sound of the tape sliding into the VCR meant it was officially movie night. VHS rentals turned average evenings into little adventures. They made choosing a movie feel like a quest. And even though we stream everything now, nothing beats the charm of browsing those old shelves and hoping your top pick had not been snatched first. The big wheel tricycle was not quiet. It was not smooth. It did not have gears or brakes or padding, but in the 1970s, it was everything. Made of hard plastic, it sat low to the ground with a giant front wheel and two tiny ones in back. It made you feel fast, cool, and slightly invincible. The handlebars squeaked, the wheels clicked. Every turn was a drift. Every ride was a race. You could spin out on the sidewalk like a stunt driver. You could chase your friends down the block, legs pumping wildly, plastic wheels screaming in protest. The seat usually wobbled, the stickers peeled off after a week. But none of that mattered. The big wheel was freedom. It did not look like a tricycle. It looked like something better, sleeker, edgier. You did not just ride it. You rode into battle, or the corner store, or the backyard dirt track you called the racetrack. It scuffed your shoes. It burned holes in your knees. But you loved it. There was something about sitting that low, hearing the thunder of your wheels and feeling like you could outrun the whole neighborhood. For a generation of kids, it was not just a toy, it was a throne. So which of these ridiculous toys did you actually own or secretly wish you had? And while you are down in the comments sharing your funniest memory, give that like button a bounce like a Pogo bell and subscribe so you never miss another trip back in time.